Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. I wanted the background music to play, but it decided it didn't want to tonight. So you had a few minutes of radio silence. I hope that didn't bother you too much. This is the night when we do more Bible study, but I have created a resource panel because I'm going to mention a resource or two. Just double checking to make sure that you guys got sound, I hope. And hopefully you don't have any problem with an echo, because I noticed that for a split second or two, there was some echoing going on. So just give me a sound check, check, check. There we go. That's fixed. Okay. I see where that was coming from. I thought it was on my end. We're good now. I've got that all the way up. We should be doing fine here. So this is the night when we do more of a study. We've been going through Matthew through Jewish eyes. And we're going to continue with that. So if you remember where we were, if not, let me just refresh your memory as to where we were. Now, this is kind of an exegetical study where we take a pericope or two. That's a section of Scripture. And we're really looking at after prayer. We're looking at verses 16 through about 21 tonight. We might get a little bit further. So without further ado, I'm going to transition to the slide that should let you see the PowerPoint. I'm going to remove a layer. Haha, I love it. I'm getting better with that because we do not need the unequal weights and measures. That was from last night. And we're transitioning. Jesus is going ahead and laying out the law of Messiah. And he's dealing with particular Jewish issues that came up. And that's why I said the Jewish background of Jesus's very proper direction or very practical direction, because he's dealing with hot issues at the time. We're going to take a look at some of these issues and how they end up getting addressed by Jesus. Now, the overarching principles will fit very well, but it's very good to get an understanding of the background that really has these issues. Now I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to tell a Jewish joke to get started with. Um, Yitzhak is the rabbi of a local congregation, and one of his congregants named Moishi is somebody he's not quite sure is being very orthodox in his practice. He thinks he might be kind of cutting corners, and so he decides that he's going to go ahead and see what's going on with Moishi. So Rabbi Yitzhak decides to follow him, and so he's following Moishi, and he sees that Moishi walks down and is going to grab a bite to eat, and so he sees Moishi walk into a Chinese restaurant. Now Rabbi Yitzhak doesn't want to appear as though he's spying on Moishi, so he decides that he's not going to go in because that'd be too obvious, and he'd have to make excuses why he wasn't there, and it would just be awkward. So he just kind of walks by, and he sees Moishi ordering. Um, and so he is kind of curious as to, hey, is he really keeping kosher? Is he really okay? Or is he really cutting corners? And so he walks by and he sees Moishi order. And of course, he has to kind of dilly dally out and kind of make like he's getting something else or watching something else. And so he kind of hangs around and tries to be inconspicuous. And of course, he sees Moishi get this plate of very, very apparent um, pork fried rice, and along with it some Chinese pork spare ribs. And so he sees the plate come. He sees Moishi order the plate. Moishi, he sees, is getting ready to eat this, and so Rabbi Yitzhak is horrified, and he kind of walks in there and goes right to Moishi's table and he says, "What are you doing, Moishi? This is pork fried rice and pork spare ribs. What are you thinking?" And so Moishi says to the rabbi, he says, "Well, you saw me walk into the Chinese restaurant, right?" And Rabbi Yitzhak says, "Yeah." Um, and then he says to the rabbi, "Well, you saw me sit down in the Chinese restaurant and order." And Rabbi Yitzhak says, "Yes, I did." And then Moishi says, "Well, you saw me get my food." And Rabbi Yitzhak says, "Yeah, yeah, I saw you get your food. It's pork spare ribs and pork fried rice." And Moishi says, "And you saw me start to eat the food." And Rabbi Yitzhak says, "Yeah, I know. That's the problem." And Moishi says, "Well, then it was all done with rabbinical supervision." So that's a little lighthearted joke, and there'll be a delay. And we'll just see how many people get it in a second because there's always kind of a delay. Um, Here's the take home truth: how a true disciple handles material stuff displays his or her spirituality. And so we're going to deal with the spiritual side. We've dealt with prayer and proper practice of prayer in light of the fact that Jewish people had a structured prayer life. We call it a liturgical prayer life. By the way, you are free to reuse that Jewish joke. You're also free to give credit where you heard it. Um, so, um, and we've dealt with the fact that Jewish people have been liturgical because of the emphasis on corporate prayer. And we talked about Jesus addressing some of the features of the Jewish prayer life. Um, and so now we're going to deal with material things and some of those issues too. Um, And so that's where we're kind of at. And that's why that take home truth. Now, while we're going to be dealing with particularly Jewish issues, material things and how we handle them aren't particularly Jewish, are they? So they have some definite application to us. But we're going to see how this comes up for Jewish people. Okay. Now, one of the things Jewish people have is the discipline of fasting. Now, by the way, the church has practiced too. Jesus gives us direction, and the church, liturgically, the high church has practiced fasting, and the rest of the church has practiced it too. Now, let me define my terms, just in case you're not familiar with them. The high church and low church are ecclesiastical terms to indicate the part of the church that is connected more with Roman Catholicism and thus is more ceremonial and structured and liturgical. The low church is often used to mean those parts of the church that are less structured in their liturgy and ceremony. It doesn't mean the high church is the correct church and the low church isn't. It's a reference to the level of structure and liturgy used. So the Lutheran church approaches being what's called the high church because they have a liturgical structure. They have a lectionary that they preach through. They have a prayer book. They have a Lutheran hymnal. The Anglican Church has the Book of Common Prayer. It is more liturgical in its services, and it is more ceremonial. The Baptist church I go to, we do have a hymnal, um, and there really is kind of a calendar to the Southern Baptist churches, but there isn't a lot of really structured liturgy between Southern Baptist churches. And so Jewish people have been traditionally liturgical. We have a Siddur. We had set prayers. We saw a service. Now, Jesus is going to move from that to a related issue, but this issue deals with food. We like food. Food is a material substance. At least the chocolate I eat is highly material and full of calories. Um, and so Jesus is going to discuss fasting. Now, Jewish people in their liturgical practice have fasts built in. Yom Yom Kippur is the major one. Um, But there are actually other ones that occur that are minor holidays that very, very observant Jews will observe. The fast of Esther, which is right before Purim, when Esther fasted and had the Jews in the capital fast and pray for her before she went before the king. That is still practiced. The fast of the firstborn among the Orthodox is practiced. That's a fast where Jews fast because of the danger to their own firstborn and that whole issue. And so Jews have additional fasting practices. Now, in Jesus' day, the Pharisees had set fasts on top of that that would occur. So Jesus is going to address fasting. So let's take a look at it. Material stuff like food, fasting for fame. Now, this was again originally done in a Messianic congregation that did uh, basically have most of the members practiced Yom Kippur and they fasted, and they'd have a break fast at the Messianic congregation. And synagogues will do that. They'll have a break fast where everyone can get together and break the fast together in many Jewish synagogues. And so Jesus is going to address fasting. We're in Matthew 6, verses 16 through 18. We're going to take a look at Jesus' directions. Now, let's talk about fasting in general. So, I went to the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible because there is this term spiritual fasting. You're going to see this among traditions of churches that still practice Lent uh, before the Easter season, and they will refrain from eating or doing certain things as part of Lent. Spiritual fasting entails setting aside activities as well as reducing or reducing the intake of food, replacing these activities supposed to be with the exercise of prayer and preoccupation with spiritual concerns. In Lent, Catholics will give up a certain food item or practice which they enjoy as a sense of fasting. The New Testament word is translated fasting, actually means one who is not eaten or one who's empty, empty as in of food. So just understanding that, yes, there was a tradition of fasting among the Jewish people that still exists to this day, and the early church took upon that discipline. It is a great discipline when used properly. Um, and so I don't discourage it, but Jesus is going to talk about the right way and wrong way to practice this. Notice that he's dealing with a topic that would be part of the culture he's going to deal with. Um, so now we have kind of a working definition. We have some background here. Okay. Tisha B'Av is another major fast day. Not so major among non-Orthodox Jews, but among Orthodox Jews, both Yom Kippur and the 10th of Av, Tish B'Av. I may have misspoke in my pronunciation. That Tish B'Av is those are major ones. The fast of Esther is considered. Also, that isn't mentioned here. I went to the Jewish JPS Dictionary of Jewish Words just to point out again. This is where did the church get its practices from, folks? Let's think about this for just a few minutes. Again, it floors me when certain people want to separate Christianity from its very Hebraic roots. Um, the disciples carried over a practice that they had. That practice changed. As the church changed, the practice remained, but the timing and things changed. The prophets complained about the same thing Jesus is going to complain about. Fascinating, isn't it? I hear all sorts of comments about Jesus not being a good rabbi and not being Jewish and being some guy who invented a new religion, and yet his complaints are right within the tradition of the prophets themselves. Let's look at Isaiah discussing fasting among the children of Israel. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you've taken no notice? So it's a complaint towards God. Um, in fact, in the day of your fasting, find pleasure and exploit all your labors. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You have not fasted as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. It is a fast that this is the fast that I've chosen. A day when a man shall afflict his soul. Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush, to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? Is it not the fast that I have chosen, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke? And the complaint is, and this is that your fasting is ceremonial and for show. Uh, I have not advertised it, but let me quickly jump there for just a second, because I'm going to be discussing Messianic Jew looks at Catholicism. When? At the Doctrine on the Block for the Block conference coming up in February. So I just threw that up there. I showed the video last night. Um, It'd be a little out of order to show the video right now, so I'll jump back to that video, maybe at the end, and re-advertise it. But there's the information, and it's interesting because Catholicism has ceremonialism just like Judaism does. And so I'm going to go back to this, and the prophets complain about fake fasting just as Jesus did. Some of the same things going on. Do you think that goes on within the church, a showy spirituality? Do you think that goes on in Catholicism? Well, I know it goes on in Catholicism, and I'm willing to bet that it goes on in certain other locations. So Jesus is going to address this because this is a real issue. And yes, and some of you, Nate mentioned Doctrine on the Box. Some of you coming out for it. I'm excited. Be praying as I try to prepare the message. I've been trying to read a 600-page catechism for adult Catholics. Uh, and so it has been a stretch to try to swallow 600 pages of Catholicism and wade through it. Um, Let's talk about Yeshua on fasting. This is verse 16 through 18 of Matthew 6, right where we're beginning. So if you want to turn there, if you want to set your cell phone there, if you just want to look at the screen and see the incredible PowerPoint here taken from the New King James. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your heavenly Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees you in secret will reward you openly. So, Jesus is giving his instructions. Now, pay attention. The wider audience is overhearing this as Jesus is giving his teaching, but he is having his disciples stand there or be there, and then he has taken the seat ex cathedra to teach. We do not necessarily think all this material was taught at once. Matthew puts all this material together, but I assure you he was teaching the disciples and others were overhearing. And that's the impression, at least, that Matthew wants us to kind of mentally see this new law being given. Okay? This. There we go. Hopefully, this will pick back up in just a second, but I keep losing connections. one of the things showy. In other words, you're not fasting for fame. You're not to display yourself in a way that it's obvious you're fasting. Um, the washing your face, the not looking sad. If you are indeed fasting in order to bring yourself before God for self examination, it is not so that you can show off and have everyone, my, how spiritual is he? And so that's the very thing that is not wanted there. And so Jesus is being very clear with his disciples that they are not to do that. The word hypocrites is the word used for people who were playing in um, in a Greek play. They were play acting. Do not be like those who play act at spirituality. But if you do this with the right heart and you're doing it for, I want to use a term now. I like this term, the audience of one, the one being God, then God will see and know your heart and he will honor your fast. So that's the instructions that Jesus is giving his disciples related to the issue of fasting. He knows it's going to be happening. Now, Jesus is going to move from material stuff like food and pleasure to what's in your wallet. Someone once said money doesn't buy happiness, um, but it buys all the things that bring happiness. That's not true either. Are we a materialistic society in the West? Yeah, we are, in the sense that a certain level of living is sort of expected. It's very hard to deal with because the basic amenities cost. And those basic amenities are tied to some basic economics. I've been in faith missions a lot of years, and my favorite thing to say is I may be spiritual, but my creditors are not. Um, and so Jesus is going to discuss something uncomfortable. Now, the disciples were not exceedingly wealthy, but that did not mean that they could not develop attitudes about economics that were not good. See, you can have a person who is poor without a lot of material things, and he could still be greedy. And you can have a rich person who is greedy. Um, and so basically, I want to get rid of this idea. We have politicians who think that greedy only refers to the top 10%. I have news for you. People at the bottom 10% can also be greedy. Because greed has to do, Jesus is going to discuss what greed has to do with, and it is not necessarily the exact number of items that you have. It's what you do with the items you have and where your focus is. Interestingly enough, what's interesting is during the Depression, when people were really scrimping and saving, my dad lived through the Depression. It was a very hard time. Charitable giving didn't waver much. Do you know that now that we're way past the Depression, charitable giving is down more now in the church than it was during the days of the Depression? Do we have less than those who were wiped out in the Depression? No, we don't. Is it possible we're developing a different attitude? Well, that's a possibility. So let's listen to Jesus on treasure. And Jesus is going to talk about where treasure is. We're in verses 19 through 21. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where the moth and the rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither the moth nor the rust destroys and where thieves cannot break in. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So this is Jesus on material goods. Now, I'm going to tell you that this is a real hard thing to discuss in the church. I can get away with things that your pastor can't. Um, and maybe he can because you're an incredible group of people. So it could be that I'm talking to the cut above. But let's just say that generally in the church, the pastor getting up there and discussing these things is not really well liked. Um, Jesus can discuss eternal things in a spiritual setting or a church setting, but financial matters tend to be a problem. Why? Why is there this strangeness about the material as being different than the spiritual? Well, one of the reasons is something called Neoplatonism. Now, in its purest form, Neoplatonism was taught that reality emanated from the one unpersonal, unknowable God. By the way, that's a lot like where Islam comes from. God's unknowable, and he is the unknowable and pretty much impersonal God. I mean, Allah doesn't really relate to anybody. So if you run into some of my fellow apologists, this is somewhat interesting. Where did I get this definition? Ted Cabal, notable Christian apologist, Augustine, in the Apologetic Study Bible, Real Questions. It's part of my Logos library. We have a tendency to look at the material world as somehow unspiritual and the spiritual world as somehow immaterial or ethereal in the West. Now, that's a Western phenomena. Jews who are even westernized uh, may not do that. To an extent, there's still kind of a Mideastern heart there. And so there isn't necessarily as much of this. On the other hand, Jewish people are so westernized that maybe there is a good deal of this um, that has floated in. So let me introduce you to Randy Elkhorn's book. This is my resource section. Check that out. Uh, my camera's acting a little weird in this particular one. Um, so I don't quite know why I look so weird. Um, but, oh, okay. I'm just going to check this real quick to see if my resolution has gone wonky. Oh, and it has. It's a resolution problem. So let me unauto it and bring it up just a little bit. Ooh, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, what can I say? Um, hmm, that is just a little strange, but oh, that's why. It's running on a different format. Okay, I don't quite know why that did that, but what you see is Randy Elkhorn's book there. That's called Heaven. It's a really good book. Oh, that could very well be the case. I could be running off the old camera. That could happen. Uh-huh. I'm going to pull me off for just a second here. And you're right, I'm running off the HP instead of the Brio. So let me fix that real quick. There we go. And that should fix me up in just a second. There you go. This is an excellent book. Now, it does have its problems. Uh, and I'll make you aware of some of those problems. Um, he has a little trouble with dealing with the eternal state and then the kingdom, and there's kind of a back and forth. But what he's really good is pointing out Neoplatonism in the church, and he's really challenging when it comes to the view of heaven that we have in our heads and that we often get from the church, and then a more biblical view. And he challenges some things, and I really like some of the material he challenges. Will there be ethnicity in heaven? And he discusses that, and I think he makes a case for it. And I thought there would be too, but I think he makes a case. And so, hey, thanks to Roxby, the new camera that you're seeing, for those tuning in and have seen the fix, that Logitech Brio she got a group of people together, and that was presented to me at the Doctrine on the Block, or the Doctrine for the Block conference last year, and it's due to Roxby and some of the people she was able to get together, and I don't know their names, who got me the Brio. So I'm going to just quickly stick out their shout out to Roxby for the Brio, because she really helped me out there. Okay, so I don't know how to spell Brio. What can I say? But I'm going to put that shout out there. So that's what you're seeing. It's a good book. I think in here, I tried to include the URL. Go to Amazon. I think it's under 20 bucks now, especially if you get the soft copy. It's really interesting and it's really challenging. He also wrote a shorter, small little booklet called The Treasure Principle, based on this very idea. And so he addresses this sort of um, view of heaven. And by the way, it was not, heaven was not of great, being with God and being in covenant relationship with God. That made sense to me. But when Christians talked about heaven, there wasn't a lot of draw, because I pictured heaven as floating on a cloud with a winged dog and eating Philadelphia cream cheese spread, as very ethereal, not very practical, not using what God created me with at all in heaven. And he challenges all of that. And so my view of heaven was far closer to what he's talking about here. But my view of heaven from the church's side was removed from this, and it was removed from that which would really resonate with my heart. Does that make any sense? But I viewed heaven through kind of a kingdom set of eyes because of my background. And when I read this, it was like, oh, now I could see. Uh, and then when I heard about heaven through the church, it kind of was like, well, that doesn't resonate with anything I know about a kingdom and serving my God forever. And so that's kind of where that's at. I've spent quite a few minutes on that, so I'm going to go back now and transition. Okay, but that is reason number one, Neoplatonism. And it's a real problem in the church. I believe we will serve God forever using our personal gifts and talents. I believe that this life is preparation for how we will serve Him later. And that really excites me because it makes it worthwhile for me to get up in the morning, because this is all job preparation for how I'm going to serve my God forever. Now, me personally, and I think I could back it up, believe that this is preparation for my job in the kingdom, and my kingdom job is preparation for how I will worship Him forever. And so that makes life really kind of exciting. Here's reason number two, though. I don't want to leave you there. Mind versus stewardship. What do I mean when I say that? Well, we tend to view things in terms of legal possession, right? It's mine. We have suits over possession, don't we? And so this issue of a stewardship mentality versus a non-stewardship mentality. Jesus is going to talk about generosity. I bet you didn't get, well, maybe you didn't get that when you read about the lamp of the body. Isn't that kind of strange? But he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about how we handle material goods in 19 through 21. He's continuing to discuss how we handle material goods in 22 and 23. Now, let's take a look at this. The lamp of the body is the eye. What? Well, you're going to see that this relates to how rabbis express themselves in the Second Temple period. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body is full of light. Really? Like if I didn't need these glasses, my whole body would be full of light? No, Jesus is using very specific terminology. But if your eye is bad, your whole body is full of darkness. You mean the fact that I wear glasses means that my body's full of darkness? No, Jesus is using rabbinical terminology. If therefore the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? There's an argument uh, where Jesus is kind of talking about this. What is this terminology about? Why would he talk about my eye being the lamp of my body? My eye doesn't shine. Rabbis use this terminology. The eye was the way we perceive or see things. Okay, now plug this into your Bible for a few minutes because you see these angels in Revelation and in Ezekiel who are all full of eyes, and you think, wow, that's not very attractive. I wouldn't want to run into a creature with eyes all over. Well, understand that the way eyes were taken is we perceive things through our eyes. In fact, we get 90% of our information through our eyes. Light travels faster than sound. It makes sense, right? And so they're depending on a word play here. Don't tell me the New Testament isn't an extensively and fully Jewish document. Look at the rabbinical terminology and the rabbinical style of teaching to a bunch of Jewish disciples that's going on here. Okay? The idea of good means single, not divided, not scattered, not confused. Well, how can my eye be confused? Well, the rabbis use this in terms of the eye being good, and they used it as generosity. So if somebody was single eyed, okay, they were generous, and bad eye was a metaphor for stingy or jealous. So now let's plug this in with this rabbinical terminology, okay? The lamp of the body is the eye. Why? Because the eye perceives. It's what gives sight. Like a lamp makes things visible or clear. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, it's generous, then your whole body is full of light. You're rightly perceiving things. Okay? But if your eye is stingy or jealous, your whole body is full of darkness. If therefore the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Jesus is talking about generosity versus stinginess and jealousy in verses 22 and 23, which follow from 19 through 21, which is about where your treasure should be. And he's using Second Temple language to do this. See, some of these analogies make perfect sense when they're put back within their context. And so Jesus is talking about the fact that those who are generous are perceiving rightly. Well, in what way? Because they know it doesn't belong to them. Why did the rabbis lump jealousy in with stinginess? Because both of them have to do with a passionate desire to possess. In jealousy, I desire to possess position or persons. In stinginess, I desire to possess position or material goods. But both of them are possession problems. And that's why Jesus is using this. Now, Jesus has moved from money to the issue of stinginess because they're related. They both fail to recognize that we're stewards and all things belong to God and return to God. And so Jesus is telling his disciples, just as you don't mishandle things through showy fasting to prove how spiritual you are, through ceremonialism, and ceremonialism always involves the use of words or material things to try and illustrate something spiritual in the case of good ceremonies, or ceremonialism and try to create spiritual effects through words or spiritual things in the case of uh, false ceremonialism, which could be formalism or could be considered idolatry, depending on how you work that, how you take that. Um, and Jesus moves from that to where our focus should be. Now, I don't think Jesus is being pie in the sky here. I think Jesus is recognizing the ultimate important thing, which is that we understand that God is the steward. We are the steward of what God gives us. If you take that attitude, then you will not have a bad eye. You will not be stingy. And so that's where that kind of comes from. And so that's where Jesus is discussing that. Now, remember, why is Jesus go into this whole thing? What is the issue here? Well, the issue is almsgiving. Fasting was a part of Jewish society, and almsgiving, particularly around certain holidays, such as Purim, uh, such as the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that was a time for charity. Okay, to avert the extreme degree, to show care for God, to show by showing care for others, to seek repentance and reparation, to seek to do righteousness before God before the Day of Atonement. That became kind of traditional. So almsgiving was connected with holidays, and fasting was connected with certain holidays. And so Jesus has this backdrop that he's dealing with. And so he moves from the issue of fasting, which is connected to holidays, to almsgiving, which is a very much a part of Jewish culture. It's called tzedakah, charity. Uh, and so he moves to this discussion about the body and treasures. Just as you're not to fast in order to be showy, you're not to lay up treasures on this earth. You're to understand yourself as a steward. No man can serve two masters. Well, which two masters? Well, let's look at it. 24, no man can serve two masters. He will hate one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, a strange term for money. So in almsgiving, you can't seek to build your material fiefdom on this earth and try to honor the God of heaven, because you are trying to accumulate things, and thus you're trying to control, and you're not rightly understanding those things as stewardship. Okay? Now, I put how to catch a monkey. How to catch a monkey? What's this about? How to catch a monkey? The story's told that one of the ways that in a certain place in the world monkeys were caught is that something that the monkey wanted was put in a jar, and the monkey would reach in and grab that item, but the jar was set up so that the monkey could not get his hand out once it was in the jar if he was holding the item. In other words, the item was large enough that when the monkey went to pull his hand out, he couldn't do it. Okay? And as long as the monkey held on to that item and tried to pull his hand out of the jar, he was caught, and then they just had to come collect the monkeys. They just take the jar, and the monkey's got his hand in, and he won't let go of the object, and then they just drag the jar, and they have the monkey. And of course, in certain parts of the world, then they kill the monkey and eat the monkey. I don't know why. Monkeys aren't kosher, and I wouldn't be interested in eating them. But they had this clever way of catching monkeys using a pottery jar, or which could be made, or some sort of substance like that, and they would catch the monkey that way. Now, if the monkey just released the item, he could indeed move his hand out of the jar and escape the trap. But once the monkey had the item, he wouldn't let go of it. And so I created a refrigerator magnet saying. This is one of Jeff's refrigerator magnet sayings. You can control the accumulation of things, or things can control you. Does that mean I'm great with this? No. Because I grew up with certain ethics about the way people live. Jesus was very clear that the Son of Man have not a place to lay his head. But we generally have very negative feelings about people who have lost their homes. I'm not saying that we ought to seek to be homeless or take a vow of poverty. But what I am saying is that the stewardship model is the model we ought to adopt. Okay? Now, Jesus moves on to worry. Why does he move on to worry? Worry isn't a Jewish holiday. No, worry is a Jewish behavior, but it's other people's behavior too. Um, and so Jesus moves from material things and almsgiving to worry, because worry and fear is often what is behind greed. Now, sometimes prestige and power is behind greed, but there's another way that we can accidentally slip into this, and that's worry. Some people are not trying to acquire goods because they want to be in control of others. Some people acquire goods because they want to be in control of their own future. Now, that would be my type of worry. Okay? Faith missions is hard for a Jewish kid who grew up in a middle class household with everything very stable, because that's just not the way you live. I could do a 5-minute comedy routine on explaining faith missions to my unsaved Jewish dad. And I could really make it funny because that made no sense to him at all. Okay? Jesus is going to move on to worry, because worry is connected to moving from a stewardship model to an ownership model. Now, I am convinced, and I haven't done the program yet, but I am thinking of definitely doing one on the theodicy of love. In fact, we're going to deal with the problem of evil. And I really think that that's a great book. That's a resource I will put up. I read it and I got it for the holidays, and I don't mind reading it again. And I really would like to take you through the problem of evil and theodicy in one of the future episodes related to apologetics, because I think this book is incredible. It builds on the work of Elvin Plantinga, but goes further. And here's the thing: life is scary, life is unpredictable. Even though God may indeed be very gracious to us and we have a fairly good life, we do not know what is coming down the pike. For a planning type of guy, it makes life really difficult. And so we try to protect ourselves. And if you're organized, you try to protect yourself by making everything in order. Because we really do want security. We want to be safe. People don't like not feeling safe. And so we will try to protect ourselves. One of the ways of doing that is to have money or possessions. And so Jesus is going to say in verse 25, therefore I say to you, do not. Therefore, why? Because you can't have two masters. Possessions will start to possess you. Therefore, I say to you, do not worry about this life. In fact, do not worry about your life. Really? Whoa, how do I not do that? What you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body and what you will put on it. Is life not more than food, or body more than clothing? And for the average person who's trying to make ends meet and struggling, they'd probably say, uh, um, you know, I'm sorry, I have to laugh. Someone told me monkeys taste good. Sorry, I just, corned beef and monkey sandwich just would not be within my dietary scope. Um, but that's okay. You are free to enjoy your freedom in Christ and eat monkey. Do not worry about or what you'll put on your body. We're not talking to disciples who were wealthy, who were part of the Kardashians. These were fishermen. They were not upper class folks. Oh, um, so we're not talking to the wealthy here. Okay. Is life not more than food or clothing? Now he's going to use a light to heavy argument here. Okay. You can't control your ultimate fate. Planning isn't wrong, but anxiousness produces self protectionism. Okay. Look at the birds of the air. Now he's going to use a light to heavy. This is a Kol Vichomer argument. Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? If God takes care of the physical creation and animals who he does care about but are not made in his image, how much more will he take care of you? It's a light to heavy argument. Point is, one of the problems with anxiousness is it fails to take into account God's love and care and views the world as a closed system. Now, that's real tempting. I mean, I fall into that all the time. It is easier to look at the world as a closed system that functions just the way um, we sort of think it does at eye level. Yeshua points to the God of God's gracious care for his creation as evidence of his care for us. That's, by the way, natural revelation. If God takes care of the birds, I mean, he doesn't appeal to a scripture verse, he appeals to natural revelation. And that's the light to heavy argument. So I kind of took you there a little early, but that's Kol Vichomer. I just want to see Jesus is using very rabbinical forms of argumentation. Can I change anything by worrying? One person once said that worrying is borrowing tomorrow's problems today. Jesus says much the same thing. It doesn't change much. It sure makes us feel better at the moment, doesn't it? Or we think we do. But it doesn't really change anything. Well, how does Jesus express this? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his statue? Some people, we've been going through Sunday school in the tabernacle and I've been teaching. If you want to know what a cubit is, it's the distance from the tip of the finger to the elbow. It's roughly 18 inches, except I have short arms. But a cubit's about 18 inches. Remember, people didn't have yardsticks back then. They used what was available to measure. Oh, my hand's connected to me. I think I'll measure something. Well, here's my long finger here. Here's my elbow. They're still connected this morning. So I guess I'm okay to use them. And so people use them of roughly 18 inches because of the proportion. Their proportions to our body. I can't add 18 inches to my height. That might be creative. Um, but I can't do that. Which of you, why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. This is another light to heavy argument. So Jesus uses two light to heavy arguments, kol v'chomer, and says, look, if something as fading as a flower gets this much attention from God, um, think about you. If God so clothes the grass of the field, which is uh, today is and tomorrow will be thrown into the oven, short lived, right? Will he not clothe you? Therefore, do not worry, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? Now, he's not saying don't plan. He's not saying don't save. He's saying it all. You're going to lose me for a second here, but we should be back on. The car goes where you're focused. The car of your life goes where you're looking, and if you're looking in the wrong places, then you're going to have trouble. Jesus takes us all the way from prayer to, all the way from fasting, which is connected to Jewish holidays, with almsgiving, which is connected to Jewish holidays, with the proper attitude of stewardship being the principle, and not worrying but trusting God as being the other principle that he's trying to convey. So he's using things like the Jewish holidays, prayer and fasting and almsgiving to point to the principles of trust in God, okay, and proper stewardship attitude. And so now we can see how we're fitting this all together. Well, as far as making it to the end, it is almost over because we are at an hour now and we've gotten through this section. We'll deal with what judging is and not judging and how it relates to seeking God in terms of Matthew next time. Um, and so I know at least one person that probably needs some rest. I did not sleep well last night because of a problem with my that might take me out of the doctoral program that was actually money related. So in speaking to you tonight, I've been kind of reminding me of some things. Yeah, I really kind of messed up. I looked at an email before I turned in. It was about staying in the doctoral program. It was money related, and I obsessed on it. So there you go. I am not immune, but that doesn't mean I can't learn and need to. It doesn't mean I don't need to be reminded, and it doesn't mean that we all can't benefit from King Jesus's teaching. Hey, I have a dear person on that I just got to do a wave to, and he is dear in a lot of ways, and I will not embarrass him by going on, but just love that he joined us. Um, well, I have to because I've just got to say, Jordan, whatever you missed, you can catch online. It's all there. But I'm thrilled you were here. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to try to do the magic button thing here and do this properly and discover that I still have trouble typing. There we go. Um, I've got to type a little message. This young man is very special. There we go. Okay. So we're going to tie it up for tonight. Further adventures in Matthew next Thursday and apologetic stuff. Heavy topic. Be praying. I'm putting it all together. Looking at Jesus's view of government. I entitled Is Jesus a Republican or Democrat? Kind of edgy title, and we'll look at that next time. Thanks so much for hanging out. You will have some time to chat. What I will do is I will advertise the conference I'm speaking at one more time here, just so that those who didn't see the video can.
But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine.
So that is coming up, and I'm working on my message workshop for that. I will be advertising the Muslim outreach that will be coming, that I will also be teaching at and doing mosque outreach at shortly. so that if there's anyone in the area, they can take part in that also. And so that is up and coming. So for this evening, I'm going to go ahead, just switch back to my major camera. Wish you all a good night. Get rest. Be at peace. Know God cares for you more than he does for the birds of the air because you're an image bearer. And may your eye be good and your stewardship be evident.